Good morning and welcome to the replay of the Thrive in Menopause webinar. Now, I ran this webinar last night and it was absolutely fantastic. Lots of great interactions, some fantastic questions. But when I got to the end of the webinar, I realized one thing I had forgotten to do, and that was push the record button. Happens more than I would like it to happen. But that doesn't mean you're going to miss out on all of the information. So what I've decided to do for you today is I'm going to re-record the entire webinar for you. But one of the things I do know is that for me, that when I get webinars that go for an hour plus long, I struggle to find the time to watch the entire webinar, regardless of how important that information is for me. I know that you're probably busy as well. So what I've done is, rather than putting this out in one entire video, I'm going to break it down into 4 smaller videos for you, and I'll email it to you in small chunks so that you can just need to watch 10 to 15 minutes a day and still get all of the information. But for those of you who do want to watch the whole lot in one go, I will actually knit all of the videos together. I'll put them all together and I'll create one long video, and I'll provide the link for that to you in the email that I send you. So you've got a choice. You can either get the emails out every day, watch a short video, or you can watch the entire one if you have enough time to do that. So let's get on with the video, and I promise you that this recording will be as good as what I delivered last night. So firstly, I want to welcome every one of you who have taken the time out to watch this information, to watch the information I'm about to share. For those of you who don't know me and who haven't really had a lot of contact with me, my name is Angela Council, and I am a naturopath and a kinesiologist. And I've been a naturopath for now probably about 16 years. Might even be going on close to 17 years. I kind of lose count with all of the years. And a kinesiologist for about 6 years or so. And I used to work in clinical practice, and now I do most of my work online, working with clients one-on-one, and I love doing group work. I love working with women in groups because I think there's a fantastic dynamic and energy when it comes to groups. Now, the reason why I really love talking about this topic of menopause and perimenopause is because I don't think there's enough information out in the world about what happens to women as we get to this mid-stage of life. In fact, we live in an ageist society that really doesn't value what women over the age of 45, 50 can actually bring to the world. And my aim is to change that. And that starts with educating women on what actually happens at this stage of life. Now, I know that when I went through perimenopause and menopause, and I'll explain what all these terms mean in a minute, but when I went through this stage of life in my mid to late 40s, I really didn't know what was happening. When I was studying to be a naturopath, I learned about how to treat a hot flush. I learned a little bit about the fact that women tend to put on weight, but there was no real solutions. We weren't really told that it was any different to any other time of life, and I realized that it is. So we weren't taught a lot about what happens at this stage of life, and certainly not how to manage it. I had a few clients earlier in my career who had menopause, but to be honest, I really didn't know how to help them. I had my standard go-to herbs that they could use, but once I got to this stage of life, I realized there was so much more than just prescribing a few herbs to reduce hot flushes. There is so much more to this stage of life. And for me personally, what I found, whilst I did experience some hot flushes, what the big surprise to me was the emotional roller coaster, the feeling of, who am I? My body was changing, and I really didn't understand who I was anymore on a physical and emotional level. My kids were getting a little bit older, didn't require my, close care anymore. They're becoming more and more independent. And I think the really big change came as my youngest finished primary school, and then both of my kids are at high school, and that meant that, I was kind of almost feeling redundant. Yes, my children will always need me, but they didn't need me the same as they did when they were younger. Now, I did actually have my children later in life, so I had my first child at 40 and my second at 43. So, I kind of came out of being a new mum and breastfeeding and moved fairly quickly into this next stage of life, this perimenopause stage of life. And I didn't realize what was going on at the time. So for me, as I said, I experienced a little bit of hot flushes. I had the emotional roller coaster. And the other major symptom that I experienced was unbelievable pain throughout my body. I was just sore. My joints were sore. I sit down or I get out of bed and I go to stand up and I was aching. I was stiff. I couldn't move. I did have osteoarthritis in one hip, but it was more than that, and that was getting worse and worse. I was in extreme pain. This pain was meaning that I couldn't sleep at night. So without sleep, I would then wake up and I was really, really tired, and the pain was just getting worse and worse. I was taking herbs, I was taking nutrients to manage the pain, but nothing seemed to touch the sides. And there were some nights where I actually had to take pharmaceutical painkillers, which is something I rarely do, but I just needed the sleep. I just needed to be out of pain enough to go to sleep. And, I looked at my diet. My diet was relatively clean. I'm eating a relatively clean diet, not really understanding what's going on. But I did discover something a little while ago, which meant that I tweaked my diet slightly. I'm going to share that with you through this webinar, what it was, what changed, and how I made massive changes in that I got rid of all of the pain. And then my next step then was to lose the excess weight that I'd been holding, because I started carrying weight and it wouldn't shift. It wouldn't shift in all the ways that I used to use, going on a keto diet, losing the kilos that I needed to. That wasn't working. And I learned how to lose that as well. And I'm going to share that with you as well through this series of webinar videos. So I don't want to get too much on me. I will share more of my story as we go along, but let's just get started so that we can kind of understand where we're at. I know that you're watching this video because more than likely you're experiencing hormonal changes and you're noticing changes to your menstrual cycle. Maybe you're experiencing symptoms such as hot flushes. Maybe you also have pain or other symptoms. Maybe you're putting on weight and you're finding it's harder to lose the weight as well. Or maybe you're not actually quite at this stage of life and you just want to know what's going on so that you can breeze through this next stage of life with ease. And that's my aim really, is the more that I share this information with women, is that they can actually make the changes before they get to the menopause stage of life, so that they don't have these symptoms that many women talk about. So let's just start with a few definitions. What is menopause? What is perimenopause? And what's happening to your hormones? So most women will understand that menopause means that your periods have stopped. So meno, which menstruation, pause, stop. So it's when your periods stop. Now you are deemed to be in menopause when you haven't had a period for 12 months. So if you've had no period for 12 months, apart from if you're breastfeeding and pregnant and all of that, so long as you're not pregnant, and you haven't had a period for 12 months, you are deemed to be in menopause. Now, menopause is just a line in the sand. Now, there are also some women who go into a medical menopause, which happens a lot quicker than the 12 months, when ovaries are removed, full hysterectomies are done, chemotherapy puts people straight into menopause in a lot quicker than that 12-month period. But a woman who is relatively healthy and is not experiencing those medical conditions, 12 months is menopause. And that is a moment in time. Prior to that time, you are in perimenopause. So peri means before, and postmenopause, post obviously means after. Now, the perimenopause period can last up to 10 years prior to menopause. So your hormones can start to shift up to 10 years before you actually finish having your periods. And then post-menopause, some women can still experience symptoms and issues with the changes in hormones once again for another 10, sometimes longer years. But my wish for you is that you don't experience discomfort, you don't experience a decrease in the quality of your life. And that's what this webinar is about. That's why I'm sharing this information, because you don't actually, this doesn't need to be a scary time. So let me briefly go through what happens with your hormones. So our primary reproductive hormones are progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone. Now, most people think that the menopause is all about estrogen levels dropping. Yes, in the long run they do, but the first hormone that starts to shift is progesterone. Now, progesterone is the hormone that releases at the middle of your cycle when an egg is released. And when the egg is released, or what we call the ovum, it releases progesterone. Progesterone is an anti-anxiety hormone. It's a feel-good hormone. It's why you generally feel better in the second half of your cycle. And if the egg is fertilized and you go on and it becomes an embryo, progesterone continues for the first 3 months of your pregnancy. If the egg doesn't fertilize, progesterone drops just before your period, and that's what brings on your period, brings on the bleed, and the progesterone levels stay back down again until you ovulate again next month. So progesterone goes up and down during the month. It's generally predominant in the second half of the cycle. Then we have estrogen. Now, estrogen is more predominant in the first half of your cycle, and it's what helps your body prepare to release the egg. So it prepares the body, gets it in the right environment to release the eggs. Now, estrogen goes up and down during the cycle, and a dip in the estrogen is one of the ways that we can tell when you're ovulating, because it changes your it changes your temperature, and as estrogen comes down, progesterone comes up. So we can have a shift in temperature, and that's what we use for fertility, to see whether or not you're ovulating and when you're ovulating. And then we also have testosterone. Now, women, obviously men have testosterone, but women have testosterone as well. We have lower levels of testosterone than men, but we need testosterone to keep us, our libido, it keeps us motivated. So as we're moving into our perimenopause stage of life, these hormones will start to shift. Progesterone is the first hormone that starts to drop down, because what happens is we don't always ovulate every single month, because we're running out of egg supply. So we actually have less ovulation. So there will be some months where you don't ovulate. So when you're not ovulating, there is no progesterone that can be released from the egg. And so that month, your progesterone levels will be lower. Now, sometimes you will still bleed, but that's because the estrogen levels come up, and that will trigger a bleed. These bleeds, and for many women, sometimes they can be very light, or they can skip a period. For other women, it can actually be very, very heavy. So these are signs of having low progesterone. So it is the first hormone to drop. Now, I do want to say before I go any further that it is actually normal. It is a natural process for these hormones to start to change, because you have very little egg supply left, and your body no longer requires you to be producing this higher level of hormones, because you're no longer in a reproductive stage of life. You won't, yes, you can still fall pregnant if you are still ovulating, but the chances of you falling pregnant are lower and lower. So, and particularly as you get closer and closer to depleting your egg supply and getting to the stage of menopause. So progesterone will drop. Now, ideally, when our progesterone levels drop, the adrenals actually take over the role of excreting progesterone. So our adrenals can actually produce the reproductive hormones, and they're like the backup for when our reproductive system isn't working. So in a healthy woman with healthy levels of hormones, what will happen is her progesterone will start to come from the adrenal glands. So that means there's not quite a big drop. and the woman just continues on, and she doesn't really have any serious symptoms that comes with lowered progesterone because the adrenal glands are looking after that. And then it's the same with the estrogen. With estrogen, it doesn't just drop, it actually goes up and down like a roller coaster for several years before it actually finally drops off. So this is one of the reasons why getting blood tests are not an efficient way of finding out whether or not you are in this perimenopause stage of life, because it depends on where the estrogen levels are at the time that the blood test as to what your result is. So if they happen to be high on the particular day that your blood test was done, your doctor will say, no, you're not in perimenopause, you're imagining it, there's nothing wrong with you, go away. But if it's low, he'll say, oh yes, you are in perimenopause, you need to live with it, this is part of being a woman, nothing you can do about it, go away. Not all doctors are like that, but many doctors are. They just don't understand what this time of life is like for women. And that goes for female doctors as well if they haven't experienced perimenopause and menopause. There is a real lack of understanding in our medical profession, and I'd also have to say in natural health as well, about what is really happening. And I think until you get there and you experience it, you don't really understand. So progesterone will start to drop down. Estrogen will be going up and down, and that will happen, and that your estrogen levels could change week to week, which is, as I said, why blood tests are not that accurate. Testosterone will also start to come down, and this starts to change the way your body is functioning. Now, if you take a step back, and if you can remember back to when you very first got your period, you will know that your body, and maybe you can't remember, I know I can't remember, but your body probably felt like it was doing things and you didn't understand. It was changing. Your body shape was changing. All of a sudden you were bleeding, and the hormones were moving. And if you've had teenage daughters, you will know this, that your body changes as you come into your reproductive stage of life. As you leave your reproductive stage of life, your body changes as well, but it's actually going back in the opposite direction, and you now have a whole pile of excess baggage for the last 30 plus years of when you've been in a reproductive cycle of your life. So your body is changing, your hormones are changing. That changes the way that your body functions. That is a fact. It doesn't have to mean that you're going to be uncomfortable. It doesn't mean that your body is going into distress, because, as I said, this is a natural process that the body goes through, and the body does have backup systems. So just because the ovary isn't producing hormones anymore, the adrenals are able to do so. And we also have reproductive hormone receptors in other places in our body as well, in the liver in particularly. The problem happens is that many women, by the time they get to this stage of life, they are depleted. Their adrenals are, many of them just running on overdrive. They're running on stress hormones. They're running on cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And that means the adrenals are a little bit tired, maybe they're, exhausted. They're still producing hormone, but there's not enough reserves within the body, either due to poor nutrition status or just because the body is really, really tired, to produce stress hormones and reproductive hormones. Now, the body is very, very clever, and when it's in times of emergency, it will always put all of its resources into the systems and the processes that are required to keep you alive. Now, producing stress hormones, cortisol, is required to keep you alive. Producing reproductive hormones, particularly as you're now coming into a stage of life where you're no longer reproducing, is not life-threatening. So your body will actually stop producing the reproductive hormones and keep producing the stress hormones. And this is one of the reasons why women experience such significant such significant symptoms at this stage of life. It's not really to do with the change in hormones. Yes, there is a change in hormones, but it's because the body isn't able to use its backup systems. It's because your body is stressed. Stress is playing a major role in what is going on. And if we can de-stress the body, allow the adrenals to come back into balance, then we find that our hormones will balance out and symptoms will start to reduce. Now, the other hormones that are playing a bit of a role in this is also insulin and thyroid hormones. Now, insulin is our blood sugar regulating hormone, and if insulin levels are out of balance or our blood sugars are out of balance, we tend to store a lot of fat, and we will store fat around our middle. The same as when we're highly stressed, we'll store more fat around our middle, around our hips. The thyroid is about our metabolism, and when the thyroid isn't working properly, we will also struggle to burn fat, and then we'll actually store that excess fat on our hips and upper legs. So we because of what we've done in it with our life, with our bodies up until the stage that we get to perimenopause, is that gives you an idea of how the body will respond. So if you're finding that you're holding on to weight, there's been times beforehand whether or not stress has been high for you, whether you haven't eaten the right diet, had too much sugar in your diet, eaten foods that are not high in nutrients. Thyroid is highly reactive to many grains, in particular wheat and gluten. So this all impacts the way our body functions. And when our body isn't functioning properly, we experience symptoms. Now, these are some of the common symptoms. Now, these are not the symptoms of perimenopause, or they are not the symptoms of menopause. These are the symptoms associated. So these are not due to the hormone shifting. The hormone shifting is the trigger. They are due to what is going on with your body before the hormones started to shift. Once the hormones shift, we lose the protectiveness. So as I said, progesterone is an anti-anxiety. It's a mood elevator. So when we lose the protection of progesterone, we start to experience anxiety, depression, fatigue, insomnia. Estrogen is a really great anti-inflammatory, and it's also good for keeping nice, strong, healthy bones. When we lose the protection of estrogen is when we can get a loss of bone density. It can also be when we start to experience lots of different aches and pains. And the loss of testosterone is to do with our libido. So when we lose our testosterone, we lose that extra boost that we get for our libido. So losing the hormones is the trigger for the symptom. It is not the reason for the symptom. I hope I'm making myself clear on that. And just because these symptoms are common does not mean it's normal. It is not normal to experience these symptoms. What is normal is for women to move through this stage of life with a slight shift in hormones and it not impact you on a physical and emotional level. And in some countries in the world, they don't even have a word for menopause. In Japan, the word that they have for menopause means new spring. So they see menopause as the next stage of their life, a rebirth. Fiji, there is no word for it. Their period stops. They're either pregnant or it's the next stage of their life. They're now a wise woman. So there's many cultures that don't even have words for this stage of life. There are women in Western culture that don't experience any of these symptoms, and I know some of them. And I've spoken to many of them to try to work out what the secret is. And I'll share the secret with you very shortly. Now, if you are experiencing any of these type of symptoms, yes, you can take herbs, you can take nutrients to manage the symptoms, but I strongly suggest that you start looking at addressing the underlying cause. And that's what this entire webinar is about, is addressing the underlying cause. So I'll talk more about that as we go along. Now, if you do want some natural remedies just to deal with some of these symptoms, there is a link there which you can go to over on my on one of my websites for a blog that I've written. And there's, I go into different herbs, nutrients. There's also some essential oils that will help you deal with some of those symptoms. But these are not long-term solutions. They are just to manage the symptoms while you address what's really going on. So, as I've alluded to as I've been going on, the main cause of the symptoms that come up is adrenal stress. And for many women, it's burnout, because the adrenal glands are not able to cope with what is going on. It's not able to cope with the changes that are happening. Liver plays a really big role in this as well, because liver is where hormones are metabolized, where excess hormones are excreted, where new hormones are created. So we need to have a really healthy liver. And unfortunately, for many women over the age of 45, their go-to to de-stress is a glass of wine. In fact, in Australia, the highest demographic of wine drinkers is women over the age of 45. And some women are drinking a lot of wine to get over the high levels of stress. The alcohol is actually causing more stress. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that one of my key symptoms was pain, joint pain, body pain. Now, when I went through and I looked at my diet, and as I said, my diet was clean. There wasn't, I made a few tweaks. Nothing was changing. The supplements I was taking wasn't making a difference. And with what I was doing with my life, I was drinking a little bit of alcohol. So Saturday night, we would go out to dinner. I would have a glass of wine. Now, I don't have my wine straight. I actually like a few bubbles. So I would half and half my wine. So it would be half wine, half mineral water, and I'd have one glass of wine a week, and that would be max. Some weeks I didn't. Occasionally, if I went out, I'd have a few extra glasses, but I was not drinking very much. But I knew that it was likely my liver was being stressed just by that small amount of alcohol. But I continued going, oh, it'll be fine. And each week I'd go and I have another glass of wine because, that's what we do. It's part of the social thing. And then just before Christmas last year, I was in so much pain and I was just so over it. I couldn't take it any longer. And I went, okay, fine. I'm just going to stop all alcohol. Just stop it all and just see what happens. And I stopped it a week before Christmas. Probably not, I know, the best time, but I decided that's it. I'm not going to drink alcohol for the next month. And I'm just going to see what happens. It probably wouldn't even have been a week, but definitely within 2 weeks, my pain was gone. My pain was gone. I could move again. I no longer felt like I was, my joints were creaking. I was able to get in and out of chairs and out of bed with ease. So I continued to not drink. And till to this day now, when we're in here at middle of November, I haven't had a drink since just before Christmas last year. And I have to tell you that I have no pain. Yes, when I go now that I have no pain, I can exercise more. So I do get a little bit of muscle pain, but that's from exercising. The pain that I had within my hip, because my osteoarthritis, it was unbearable pain. And if any of you have osteoarthritis, you'll understand what that pain was. All that pain went too. Now, I have since had a hip replacement, but when I went to have the hip replacement, it wasn't due to the pain, because I wasn't experiencing pain in my hip anymore. I had loss of mobility because I had dysplasia and my hip wouldn't move. So that actually limited some of the activities I could do. I was struggling in yoga. I was getting really loud banging noises in my hip as I was going bone on bone when I was trying to move. I couldn't do the walking that I want to do because I love hiking in the bush. So I got a hip replacement, but it wasn't due to the pain. I was not getting pain. So this shows you how important the liver is, particularly when it comes to this stage of life, because we no longer have the protection of the hormones, the estrogen, which is a natural anti-inflammatory. It's not there anymore. So I no longer had estrogen to protect me. So I needed to change my diet, my lifestyle, so that my body was no longer in pain. So liver plays a really big role. Many women are also nutrient deficient. That's playing a really big role as well. Now, if you've been on the oral contraceptive pill, it depletes you of some really key B vitamins. So you'll be deficient in them. Women are deficient in selenium and iodine, which is required for healthy thyroid, essential fatty acids, which are great anti-inflammatory. So many of us are deficient in nutrients, and we need to correct those nutrient deficiencies. And when we correct those nutrient deficiencies, we can start to rebalance up the hormones and reduce our symptoms. And then obviously, as I said, hormone imbalances, and also beliefs around aging. Because we live in such an ageist society, many of us, whether or not we're conscious of it or not, have this fear around getting older. We have this fear around menopause. We hear the horror stories around menopause and women saying how bad menopause is. So many women, as I speak to them, they are afraid of what's going to happen because they've heard how bad it can be. You know, it's a little bit like birth stories. You know, we tend to share the horror stories and we don't hear the beautiful stories that happen with birth. I mean, we do hear some of them, but a lot of people share their horror stories, and it scares women because there's not enough real information. And this is what's happening when we're talking about menopause. You know, I've heard women, I've had one woman say to me, oh, I'm just going to put my head in the sand and I'm just going to ignore it's ever going to happen. Other women who tell me they're scared because they've heard of their friends who've had such, you know, horrific times of it. So there's this belief that it's going to be a hard time. And I guarantee you, if you believe you're going to have a hard time, you will have a hard time. Change your belief systems and own the fact that this is actually a beautiful time of life, that there are many women that get through this stage of life with relative ease, and they step into their knowing their wisdom. This is truly a rebirth. And yes, sometimes there might be some tough times, just like the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. There can be some tough times emotionally, and you might have a few symptoms, but it doesn't need to be about, you know, this is the worst time of my life. This is the time to actually grow your wings and fly. This is the time to step into the next half of your life. This next half of your life is for you. You have given everything of yourself to your family, to your parents, to your partners, to your job. You've done that. You've done the hard yards. Now it's time for you to step into this next stage of your life and truly own who you are and create the life that you want and live the life that you want. So really, really important for me for women to have different beliefs around aging. And as each one of us changes our own beliefs, we will then start to change the collective and the community beliefs. And that's what I want to do. I want to change the community beliefs around aging and around menopause. And that's why I'm sharing this information with you. So what do we do? If you are experiencing any types of symptoms, what can you do? There are 5 things, 5 steps. Number 1, eat well. Number 2, sleep well. Number 3, move well or move regularly. Manage your stress and change your mindset. These are the 5 key steps to rebalance your hormone and to navigate this stage of life with ease. Now, you may need some support of herbs and nutrients along the way, but these are the key things. If you can do this, you will feel and look so much better. So how do we make all this happen? What is the best solution? Now, I was searching for a lot of this, and particularly when it came to diet. What is the best diet? What is the best diet for women to help them lose weight, to have more energy, to be able to move, to reduce their pain and all of that? I was looking for it, and there's people out there that say, oh, you should be on a keto diet. And for me, honestly, keto diets always worked for me in the past. It didn't work for me now. So I knew the keto diet wasn't the solution. Paleo, which is similar to keto, was that right? Did I need to go vegetarian? There were so many different things, and I really struggled to find a solution that worked for everybody, because as I was working with clients, some diets were working with some clients and some were working with the others. We were getting successes, we were getting not so great results. It's like, what is it? There's got to be a solution. And then I spoke to the women who did go through menopause quite easily, and I asked them, but some of them were vegetarian, some of them were meat eaters, some of them were thin women, some of them were bigger women. There was no consistency. And then I realized there is no one size fits all solution. You need a personalized approach. And that's when I discovered Personalized Health Solutions, where we look at each individual person as an individual and we create and structure health plans based on their body type, and how it functions.